Oh boy, that happened quickly. I wasn't ready for this one this morning. There have been a lot of things going on, but first of all, hey everybody, I'm Jem Schofield, and welcome to the C47's channel. And doing another live stream today because, well, for once, and this is not the only reason I'm doing a live stream, but for once, I'm actually a little bit busy. So, nice little change starting to happen. Hopefully, it will continue. Definitely seems like a turning point in terms of starting to see projects come in. Um, I wrote my first proposal for a real project last weekend. It's the first proposal I had written in 4.5, maybe 5 months. So little tiny small things happening in that time period, but nothing significant enough to say this is real work. So that seems to be changing, and I'm happy about that. Don't forget, if you are somebody who comes to this channel on a regular basis, this afternoon, 3 p.m. Pacific time, Cameron Flask, we're talking about that 12K monster from Blackmagic Design, the 12K Ursa Mini Pro. What's that all about? Come check it out on this channel, 3 p.m. Pacific. Myself, Ben Barden, and Caleb Pike. And there you go. So probably wouldn't be a bad idea to just make sure that you can hear and see me properly. Whether you like the way I look or not, that I can't help with. Well, maybe I could with some lighting, but that's the deal. But I just want to make sure you can hear me fine, you can see me fine. Still kind of a semi-deconstructed space here, so it will feel a little bit more live than it normally does because I'm missing a whole sound blanket that's usually over there. And that's the deal. And the only way these types of live streams work is with the chat. So that's about interaction and questions and stuff like that. David's waiting for a 20K light or a 20K camera. Either they do have 20K lights, and Josh can hear and see me fine. So here we are. So Wednesday, July 22nd. The world's still in chaos, and here we all are trying to figure out equipment and production and creativity and storytelling and all of that fun stuff. Just give you an update on some of the stuff I've been doing. Camille, good to have you here. I have been doing some social media content, which has been a combination of stills and video. A lot of XT4 on the Weeble S, and doing work for friends of mine who have a production company based out of New York, and they do a lot of social media stuff for electronics companies. So we were doing a bunch of stuff having to do with a new hoverboard that actually has a handle and you can lift it up. So that's kind of the gimmick on there. And there you go. Good morning, Pat. Good morning, Andres. What else have I been doing? Just submitted a proposal for a pretty large still photography job. Unbeknownst to maybe many people who come to the channel, I have a long history with still photography, but my wife is a professional photographer and actually went to SVA and has a degree in photography and all of that fun stuff. So it is definitely a part of the business. It is just a part of the business that kind of goes in waves, and it seems like stills are being more and more requested for content. And of course, with everything that's going on right now, stills and video as combinations of things for locations that people can't actually visit, but they need tours of and things like that. So that's the other one there. And then the bigger job is an educational series around some cameras. So we'll see what happens with that. So that's all potential work, which is making me very happy because I like to work. I like to support my family, send them to good schools, and feed them good food and all of that fun stuff. So I hope the same for everybody out there. I hope that some people are getting some degree of work. Some of you have been working the whole time. And here it is. We've got David starting off the conversation, and he has pre-ordered the Aperture Nova P300C, and he did that back in May, and he's still waiting on it. And really tomorrow, I believe it's tomorrow, the 23rd, is kind of the, and we kind of had a not more than a tease recently from Aperture. We've had lots of teases, but tomorrow seems like game day for the 300C. So this is, if you're not familiar with it, it is an RGB, basically, and 2 lights LED panel. Really sort of sits in that space, from what I can understand, with slightly more output than the S30C from Arri, less output than the S60C from Arri, which are kind of the benchmarks when we talk about how much light are you getting out of a panel-based, RGB-based LED. And there you go. So let's start talking about it. So in the description, one of the things that I mentioned is there's a lot of freaking lights out there. And that is just a short list of companies that are making continuous lights, along with, maybe we'll talk about a couple related to kind of the Amazon ones. And Camille's even asking about the Godox UL150, which is not a light that I have familiarity with, unfortunately, but that's another company that's making lights. There's probably a half a dozen companies that I missed in that description that are making lights that are being bought on a regular basis, and then there's also a whole bunch of companies that we're less familiar with that you may find the lights on Amazon or B&H that are still making continuous lights for production, not just for other purposes, but they're not the ones that we're talking about every single day. So Pat says, I know this is old tech, but I'm trying to sell an Arri 300 and a 650 Fresnel kit for a friend if someone wants to go old school. Great lights. Let's have that conversation before we have any other conversation. I should have added Lowell to this list too for companies. So basically, when we talk about quartz halogen technology, or commonly referred to as hot lights, we're talking about lights that are pushing out generally fresh bulb, pretty consistently 3200 Kelvin light output. And the power draw from mains is also the same rating that we're talking about in terms of output. So a 300 has a 300 watt essentially output from that tungsten, or we say quartz halogen, generally a unit, and it's drawing 300 watts. HMI technology is a little bit differently. It's a little bit different. It's generally daylight balance, though there are exceptions to that. And again, I forgot to list K5600 as another company, and that technology is a little bit more efficient. It's not as efficient as LED technology, but you're probably getting about a 2-to-1 output from that. So let's say a 1.2K HMI might be giving you the equivalent output if it were a tungsten unit of close to 2.5K. And then LEDs are all over the place. We could be getting 4 to 7 times the output of the power draw. So you might be drawing 100 watts and getting a 400 watt equivalent of what you might be getting out of a quartz halogen, unit. So that's just kind of some things to think about. But the other part of that equation, which goes back to those Arri lights and a lot of the Lowell original Omnis and Pro lights, and that Arri kit is sort of like their 3-light kit was the kit out there for a lot of small crew professional work. And what we get out of those bulbs, which is very hard to get out of LED technology, though there's been a lot of advancements, is full color spectrum. So when we talk about CRI, or color rendering index, it's one rating for the spectrum of light that is being produced by that lighting fixture. And the great thing about those older hot lights is they do an incredibly good job at that. The other part of that, which is just if not more important in terms of the overall equation, is the camera itself. And cameras historically have actually been tuned to capture reflected light from sources like quartz halogen and from daylight. So that's what they're looking for. And of course, HMIs are doing as good a job as they can of reproducing the quality of light that is daylight. Most people love HMIs, some people don't. There are always going to be personal preferences. And then we get the uglies with those fluorescent fixtures, but until a little company called KinoFlow came in. And then what they did is they started to make ballasts so that the lights didn't flicker for video, and they also started to tune them so that you were getting much better quality out of those, higher CRI, better color reproduction, the phosphor coating, and everything about the emitted light was tuned in a similar way to the challenges we've had with LEDs to give us a better quality light so we get nice skin tones and all of that fun stuff. So they still have a place, and what I love about those, especially the Airy Fresnels, is they are hard lights that you can modify. They have all the disadvantages of hot lights, which is they take a long time to cool down. You become the drummer in the band, and they're hard to work with, and they're uncomfortable for talent, so you're walking in a lot more, and you're doing touch-ups and all of that good stuff. But I'm not getting rid of all of mine. I still have a 1K Airy Fresnel. I still have an Omni, a Pro Light. I love my small dados. I think they're fantastic. The 150s, which are very efficient because of the lensing, so they give you about twice the output just because of the lensing that they have there. So there you go. Good. So there's that. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So Josh says we had shoot a couple of weeks ago, and we used Cream Source SpaceX. It was amazing. Yes, it is amazing. And there are also, Mole Richardson makes some great space lights, and there's some other companies that are making those types of lights out there. There's no question that Cream Source is making really, really beautiful and incredibly well-built fixtures. In fact, they just announced a new light, which is on News Shooter, I believe near the top of the heap, and that looks to be a great light. Interestingly enough, it's RGBW, like the sky panels from Airy, and it doesn't seem to have two whites, though I'm not sure how they're tuning it and how they're handling that, because there's also been some advancements in LED technology where, yes, we're going RGB, but in addition to that, there's the white formula that has to be put into that. So the beginning of that was just RGB, and the creation of white light by combining red, green, and blue. Kind of garbage. Then what they did, sorry about the AF, is they added a white LED, basically diode, to the mix, and then that combined with red, green, and blue was giving a much more accurate output of light in terms of white light. And then what has happened really over the last couple of years or so is new combinations of formulas, one of which is, we're talking RGB here. Obviously, if we're talking single color temperature, it's a little bit different. But the ability to put two whites in there, so a warmer and then a cooler white, and then combining those to give accurate white light. And then there's also the approach that companies like Hive are taking, Airy with their orbiter light, where they have other colors inside of there, like lime, that are combined with red, green, and blue, giving us even more accurate light coming out from the LEDs. So a lot of this has to do with the light that's outputted, but more importantly, going back to what I was saying before, it's the light that's reflected, and the fact that cameras generally are not designed to see and capture reflected light from LED fixtures in the same way they are from daylight and from hot lights. So the end result there can be a mess. Come on, Caleb. That is a ridiculous comment. That sounds like a camera and flask comment. I can't even repeat that. That is ridiculous. So when we talk about that reflected light, what happens is when we start to get into these various iterations or models of RGB-based LEDs, what we see with our human eye, or this one because you can see that one better, is not necessarily what the camera is capturing from that reflected light. And that's the key. And in fact, for a long time, I really misunderstood this. What I really thought was happening was it was the lights themselves only. So I didn't realize that the cameras played such an important part in this. And what's starting to happen is companies like KinoFlow are starting to profile and create basically, I guess, presets inside of their lights that are tuned to the specific cameras and sensors that are inside of those cameras. So you're shooting with an Arri Alexa, the white light that it emits or a particular color that it reproduces may be different because they understand how that sensor is receiving reflected light, and you're going to get a more accurate captured image than you would if you had the same setting on that KinoFlow light for an Arri camera, and now you're shooting with a Panasonic or a Sony camera. So there's actually a group over at the ASC, which is made up of a number of the lighting companies out there. I know that Hive and Quasar and I believe Roscoe, which is the Lumiere people, and some other companies are involved in that. And what they're doing is they're actively working towards making the reflected light that we get off of these fixtures, I guess, more accurately captured by different cameras. And that's going to be a long, long road. It's a Wild West. I think Aperture is part of that as well. But it's important to know that there is attention on that, and it is important. And then there's also something called SSI, and if you read lighting reviews from News Shooter, one of the interesting things is that what Matt Allard is doing, who was just on last week's Camera and Flask, is he's talking about what that number means. But more importantly, when you look at that number and then you look at a particular fixture from a particular manufacturer, it starts to give you clues as to what manufacturers' lights, specifically LEDs, are going to work with other manufacturers' lights. Are they going to play nice with each other, or are they going to be working against each other? And it's a rabbit hole I've just started to look down. I'm not even in the rabbit hole yet, but it's really interesting to see what's happening with that technology. Was this what I was going to talk about today? Not really. I just said let's talk about lighting. But as with me and the way I work, it's what comes into my head that comes out of my mouth generally. Oftentimes edited, sometimes not. So there you go. So we've got the chat here. I've got the Q&A up. And what I'd really like to know are what questions you have about lights and the lights that you either own or the lights that you're thinking about getting. It's important to preface that with if you're going to ask a question, put an @the_C47 into the chat, and B, let me know what types of productions and locations you would be using these lights in, so we can have a conversation about that. And while I'm kind of waiting for that, and you kind of want to get my take, potentially, if you do, on what kinds of lighting and lights you want to talk about, I can talk a little bit about some of the smaller fixtures that are out there and what they are. Um, Interestingly enough, right now, just because I'm putting together a series of courses on remote production, I have been experimenting with different types of lights and how they can be purchased and used effectively at different levels of production. And what I mean by that, and I'll get to your question in a second, Gerald, is um, there are a lot of people out there who have absolutely no interest. They are completely unlike the people who normally come to this channel. They have no interest in a career in video production or filmmaking. They have no interest in really how cameras work or how to light in a more effective way or how to capture audio more effectively. But they are tasked with and faced with the realities of today's world, which is changing even more so, especially in the last 4 to 6 months. And they're tasked with the sort of overwhelming, I don't know if it's a job, of doing this effectively, video communication. And so what they have to do is they basically have to figure out how to use some of this technology effectively in their production, but they're not going to go out and buy a cream source or a Lumiere light from Roscoe or cream source from cream source. Watch yourself, Caleb. I've got my eye on you, kid. And so that's some of the things that I've been doing, and some of the lights that I use, and Caleb, I'll give you a shout out on these, like these little lights here that cost generally between $15 and $25 US. On Amazon, if you test them and make sure they don't flicker, they're dimmable, they have different color temperatures. You're not going to use that one unless you want to give somebody a headache. I apologize about that. But they're so inexpensive. These little puck lights that you can use. Is this one on? No, this one's dead. Time to recharge that. But these little puck lights are also multicolor. This one's not dimmable, but you get 2 of them for, I don't know, $16 or $17. And they're great to create some depth in the background. In fact, I have 2 of these little lights right here, and that's what's basically creating the light that's over my left shoulder. So I just turn those on and stick them on the shelf and let some light go on the bookcase and decide how dim or how bright they're going to be and what color temperature to a degree. There's no dial-in of Kelvin on those things. So, what you see, what you get, and hopefully the camera sees something that's okay. So, questions. Gerald says, do you think the Aperture MC RGB light is the best bang for the buck small light? Well, that's a good question. I think it's an absolutely amazing light, and I have 2 of these. And with the whole infrastructure that Aperture is creating with their app and Sidus, I believe, Sidus Link, I believe, and being able to control their lights or new lights from that app, that'll be true for the Nova 300C, that's true for the MC, that's true for the new 300 series and all that kind of stuff. They're amazing, but to me the MC is an accent light. So that's a light that you're using to create depth in a space. It's something you're using for macro stuff, for little kickers of light. Not really focusable, but incredibly versatile to have around. I'm not buying a 12-pack of MCs. Maybe for a big project that was very specialized where I would use those. But having a couple of MC lights in your kit is great. There's other lights from other companies. The Bowling P1, which is from Andy Cine. There's the Luxley lights. You've got the cello and the viola. And to me, these are better, quote-unquote, on-camera lights. I don't like on-camera lights. I like them to be, off-camera. But they give you a little more flexibility because they're giving you more output out of those fixtures. So as soon as you need more output, you need to start looking at some other things. But absolutely 1,000,000%, the MC lights are rock stars. And for $90 US, I think they're fantastic. Just don't think they're going to be the light that you're going to use even necessarily as something that you would use as a really effective kicker off screen, because the big thing that we always have to consider when we think about lighting is the ambient light in the space as well. I am in a completely controlled space right now, so it's very, very easy for me to to use whatever lights I want in this space. We'll see if this works. This is going to be janky right here. Okay, you saw those things, those gooseneck lights. Right now on Amazon, those silly little lights that are USB powered are $25.99 each, and there's a 50% off coupon. So you can buy 2 of those things for $26, which is ridiculous. And they have 3 color temperatures. Are they amazing? No, but they're dimmable. And if someone was setting up a controlled environment office space for meetings, for basic video communication, Skype calls, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Blue Jeans, whatever they're using, they could be a good solution in a controlled environment. As soon as there's ambient light, these things are garbage. There's not enough output. And I have 2 of them, so I can bounce them off of a piece of diffusion. But that's $25, right? I mean, what are you going to do? Mount them to your desk. They have effect. So there you go. I got a Falconized flexible 18 by 24 bicolor a while ago and have been quite happy. Have you looked into the Falconized brand? I have a little bit. I don't have a lot of experience with them. They seem okay. Build quality seems sort of in the middle of the pack. And, one of the things that you have to make a decision about, and it's a really important decision you need to make when you're buying equipment in general, but I would say that it's true of lighting as well, is, are you buying this equipment strictly as an owner-operator and the only person, or within your company, the only people that are going to be using that equipment? Or are you buying that equipment so that it can be rented on a job, whether you're using it or not? And also, does it have resale value? We all know that equipment is going to plunge in value almost as soon as you buy it. Think cars, and that's a good place to be. But if you buy into a brand like Falconize, as opposed to now, but maybe not 4 or 5 years ago, a brand like Aperture, what is the desired usage of that light? And then does that light have appeal, like lenses, like cameras, to a broader client base? If you're just creating your stuff yourself and nobody cares what it is and you're getting good color reproduction, you're getting the output out of the fixtures that you're buying that you want, and they're allowing you to do what you want to do, then no problemo. Just go with what you want to go with. But if you're going into production situations where clients are expecting to see a sky panel, a light panel Gemini, I would say to a certain degree, Aperture lights nowadays, so there's still not going to be the big rental house items out there. And that's not because they're not built well or they don't have good capabilities. It's really because they're not, they're just not in rental houses in the same quantity as Kino Flows and Airy lights and, some of the other lights out there. And that's what I'm saying. So there you go. Good. All right, let's see what else we got. Yep, I bought that. Boom. What type of lights are good for, what does that say? Late night, did you say Cinemax type shoots? I don't know what that means. I mean, growing up, a Cinemax shoot could be a lot of things, often called Skinemax in the States. So I don't know where we're going with this, but it really depends what kind of content you're trying to create. And maybe I'm reading that incorrectly, and it's just my eyesight. I don't know. My advice would be, I don't know what this question is all about, but let's go soft lighting. Okay, let's go soft lighting. Let's not go hard lighting. Good. let's get some more questions up on the board, kids. I'm ready. Good. I like that. David's taking the piss. So my answer was appropriate then. I actually gave you a real answer even though you're taking the piss. So that's totally fine. So what else we got lighting wise? I love these little lights. In fact, let me just fire up this just quickly here and see what we have. Hold on one second. Yeah, this is the easiest way to do it. There's not a lot of light in this room. I'm really not pushing a lot of light. How old am I? I'm older than you think, Shiz. But that's okay. I think I'm older than you think. I don't care. You can guess how old I am, and I'll tell you. So I already showed you these lights right here, but these lights are super inexpensive. I wish the controls were near the top, but they're not. And again, they're inexpensive, and I only have one of them bouncing off on just this little rigid reflector here. So that's just basically bounce light, and I can move it around. And if I want, they're on the gooseneck, so I can turn it this way or that way, and I'm getting it on the light a little bit here, and you get the basic idea. Hold on, I'm actually going to make a change here while we're doing this, and I'm going to go to a shot of the ceiling. I have to make an adjustment. Hold on. I will be right there, kiddos. Get your questions ready. There we go. All right. What was all that about? What all that was all about is that the mounting of this thing is a little bit janky. So, I have to go fix the mounting of that. But I like that little gooseneck. I can just reach over and have this on the desk. And I'm older than David Carroll. I can tell you that much. There you go. All right, let me scroll up here. Let's see. Not really a gear question, but do you find that video conferencing software, Zoom, Google Meet, makes shadows look kind of bad? I ended up going less contrasty than expected with a recent setup. Ryan, that's actually a very valid question, and it is lighting related, but it's really more about how images are processed. So when we sort of started the live stream on this channel, we were originally using something called Mimo Live, which I like and doesn't seem to alter the image that's being processed. Google Hangouts at the time, when it was actually used and was supported, was okay. From what I remember, the lighting and what we were doing with the image was not being affected. Then I started to use something called Lightstream, which if you have been part of this journey with the C47 and especially with Cameron Flask, you know that we had some issues with that. I love the solution, but the other thing is that we were also testing some other stuff, and one of them is called StreamYard. And what I noticed about StreamYard is as soon as I pushed that image through it, it got crunchified. It was like a big S-curve was being added to the image. And then Lightstream made an update, and the same thing started to happen. And I would not be surprised if the same thing is happening with solutions like Google Meet and Zoom and things like that. Though for me personally, I haven't, going from camera to the A10 Mini into my computer, seen any issues as far as I can tell with Zoom. I definitely am not seeing issues with the change of image with Ecamm. But I was with StreamYard, and I was with Lightstream's last update that we were using. So I hope that answers, but I'm not surprised that you're doing that. Some silly comments here. Tungsten all the way. Yep, it's still got great color. On most YouTube shoots, folks using modifiers like softbox. On more pro sets, I things like scrims, reflectors. Is this more about space limitations, or is there another reason? Well, Gerald, that's a great question. So, in small to no crew production, a large, hopefully, softbox is doing two main jobs. It is softening and diffusing the light that's coming out of the front of that modifier, which then becomes your key. But just as importantly, it's flagging light. It's blocking light from going in all different directions. And when you're either in a small space and or you're working as a small crew, the advantages of working with softboxes can be huge. But, and this is a big one, I'm older than Camille, or Camille's guess. So here's the deal. The reason that you start to see scrims and you start to see larger frames and silks and butterflies and all of that stuff is twofold. First of all, you generally have a larger crew that can work on usually grip and electric to set and also modify those light sources. But the second part of that is that generally the director of photography is trying to recreate, most of the time, though obviously in science fiction and other genres it's a little bit different, but recreate a type of light that is more natural and is more realistic to what we would see in the real world, but with that little Hollywood twist so that it's polished. And of course, so your wides are maybe your lighting is a little broader in terms of what you're seeing. It's definitely still motivated, it's still going in the directions. But then as you start to move in towards talent, you start to modify that lighting. And if you're in a softbox situation, you kind of just have a softbox. But if you have bigger light sources that you are modifying, then as you start to change your setups and start to get different shots in a particular location, you can finesse those. You can put sides on, you can put toppers and bottomers and all of those types of things on there. And you can start to add different levels of diffusion. So maybe for the wide, you're pushing a large, we'll just take for giggles a 5K light, and you're pushing that through an 8x8. But then you start to go into a close-up and you decide, what I'd like to do is here's my 8x8 source, here's my, my 5K source, and I'm pushing that through some sort of diffusion here. But when you go in for your close-ups, what you want to do is basically take that 8x8 and you want to break it. In between the light and the 8x8, you put another piece of diffusion. So maybe you put a 4x4 or 6x6. And so you break that light even more to make it even softer. And so really a lot of it has to do with that finesse and that control, but also creating light that feels like it's motivated and coming from a space. If you're shooting an interview in a relatively controlled environment, you have two options. You could go, for me personally, generally, I'm going to go with a large softbox, maybe a 3x4 softbox or an Octa, and use that as my key. And it's going to handle a lot of the problems having to do with spill. Might put a grid in the front of that to direct the light even more, even though it's going to suck up some of the light, so there's even less spill in the space. Or I'm going to set up a source and maybe push that through something like a 4x4 or 6x6, but then light is going everywhere. And then you either have to embrace that or know that that's the look that you're going for, or you then have to start putting up floppy cutters and you have to start doing things to modify where that light is and is not going and controlling it. I generally prefer the look of that style of lighting, but it doesn't necessarily mean, what are you going to do? David, good old days of Lightstream. Yeah, we can keep it interesting in other ways. Do I know about the Elgato lights streamers tend to use? Not really. I mean, I know of Elgato, but I've never really used their stuff. Again, question specifically for me and at the C47 helps. Brutes are great. Okay. What else we got here? I know Kickstarter now has a little thingy called the Big Soft. Not sure if it's worth considering. Is it big and soft? What is it? Send a link. Come on, Shiz. I want to know about this light. What's going on with it? Just to give everybody a heads up, we're at about 9:40 a.m. here on the west coast of the United States. We're in a little bit early today because I have kids, and one of them has an appointment at the dentist. So I'm going to take them to the dentist. Let's see. Any more questions? Let's get some more questions up. All right. So really, when it comes to controlled environments, one of the things that you have to do is you have to do tests, even uncontrolled environments. The thing is that when we're using these different fixtures, and it doesn't matter if it's KinoFlow or it's Airy, it's Aperture, it's Nanlite, it's something you got on Amazon or at a Home Depot or a Lowe's or another do-it-yourself place or Felix or whatever it's going to be, light panels, you have to do some tests. And what you have to do is you have to take those cameras into and that lighting into these different environments that you're going to use the lights. And you have to set up the cameras and the lights in the way that you would use them. And you'll find that these different sensors and these different lights react differently to each other. And you're going to have to make minor modifications to the color temperature that's coming out of the light. If you have the ability to change the green magenta bias of the light, you might want to make changes inside of the white balance settings of your camera and all of that fun stuff. So I switched from using my Aperture Light Dome 2 on my 300X for main light to a small Chimera strip box on my Zoom streaming for more room. Yeah, that does make sense. But it is now a strip light, so it has a certain quality to it. And depending on where that light source is coming from, it may be better that you're on a strip light or it may not. If you're on a strip and you put a grid on there, then you could get a very focused light on a particular part of a person. And then if it was in the softbox, it would tend not to spill onto the background that much. As I showed you before, I have this gooseneck light here, and I'm in a relatively small space, which is we'll just say about less than a 12 by 12 space in here. It's about an 11.5 by 11.5 space. And just by turning this gooseneck lamp in different directions, you can see, because it's bounce light, how much effect it has on how much or how little of the space it's hitting. So, it can have a lot of effect just by making little tiny moves. Shiz says, I only have 2 Godox SL60W ones and very old yesteryears, I like that, LED panels by Aperture. Probably want to get the new Godox ones and then 3 to have a bit more solid setup. Yeah, I mean, that's also another decision you have to make is, are there advantages to going with multiple smaller fixtures that you're doubling or tripling up, or do you want to just go with a larger single fixture that you can dial up or down the intensity? So a lot of people will get something like a 2x1 LED light, which is kind of a rock star size because it generally can have enough output to do some serious damage when it comes to more ambient light within a space. But having multiple lights gives you the flexibility of letting those lights do different jobs, especially when you're in more controlled lighting environments. And remember, as long as there's a decent amount of output out of that light, you should be able to modify it by bouncing or diffusing it. So it really depends on your setup. Shiz, I'm happy to kind of go back and forth with you on questions you have related to future purchases that you're thinking about making having to do with those lights. I don't want to see you go into some lights that aren't necessarily going to be the right lights for the type of production you're going to be doing. So before you add to cart and you click on buy, let's make sure we have a conversation about that to make sure you're making the right choices. In fact, in the outside world, quote unquote, outside of this channel, a lot of what I do is consulting and helping companies not only learn how to use equipment, but also to make the right buying decisions for their particular application or applications of that equipment. KinoFlow Diva lights with LED tubes. Well, there are modifications you can do with that. And if you want to take those older housings and you want to modify them, it's not a bad idea. There's also options for taking those older area housings, and there's companies that make modifications to basically keep the housing of that Fresnel and that beautiful Fresnel lens, but modify it with LEDs inside of them. And I don't think that's bad, but what you have to do is you have to look at the current state of the lighting industry and what options are there. And are there disadvantages to doing that in terms of A, form factor, and B, the advancements in the bulbs that are or tubes that are available on the market? You know, you've got companies, again, I didn't mention Astera, that are making excellent LED tubes. You've got obviously Quasar, who are doing great things with LED tube lights. And that's the beautiful thing too, is, you know, if I'm going to look at an LED matte light, I'm probably going to go to Westcott, lifetime warranty, paying a little bit more, but consistent in terms of the quality of the product. But they don't make a lot of other lights that are in a lot of other form factors that are, well, let's say we've got the ice light, which is obviously a tube, but not in the same way that you would be looking at Astera or Quasar if you're looking at tube-based lights. So you look at each company for their strengths. Aperture is not making tube-based lights, so you might get an Astera or a Quasar, or Quasars or Asteras for that application if you needed those types of lights. Or you could modify and essentially not really rehouse, because you're keeping the housing, but repopulate the Kinos. Okay. Impulse buys tend to be a thing, yeah. Though the Godox aperture, there are some decent, fairly priced 3-light kits to serve. Yeah, let's just talk about it. I mean, I'm really liking the Mixed Panel 150 from Nanlite. I loved the way they kind of diffuse stuff. Tube lights are great for certain things. They have a very certain quality. They're also relatively broad because of their design, so they can be very effective. And depending on the length of light that you get, they can be very portable in terms of traveling with them, either slung over your shoulder, or if you're getting 1.5 to 2 foot units, they can travel very, very easily. And a lot of them now have built-in batteries and stuff like that. I've been playing with the Nanlite ones, which are nice, but really, industry-wide, the two brands that most people are using for tube-based lights right now are Quasar and Astera. Yeah, so there you go. What else we got? Anything else? Because I'm going to wrap it up. I'm almost 10 minutes to the hour. And later on today, we have at 3 p.m. Pacific, which is only about 5 hours from now, just over, myself, Ben Barden, and Caleb Pike. It is going to be Cameron Flask, episode number 76, though Ben will argue with me that that is not the case, and he's probably right, but I'm still going to say it's number 76. And yeah, are you going to talk about that 12K camera? What the F is up with that thing? It's going to be exciting, and I think it's going to be fun to talk about, and it's not about the Ks, in my opinion, but we'll see what everybody else says when we get on the chat. And this is really going to be a conversation between the three of us. Ben will be hosting, and you in the chat. If you don't know what Cameron Flask is, come by today at 3 p.m. Pacific and check it out. Gets a little rowdy sometimes, not really, but it's a lot of fun. And there we go. Yeah, black magic out of nowhere, but that's their MO. That's what they do. And, we get another Ursa Mini Pro with some interesting technology to discuss. If you want to do your homework before the show, go over to newsshooter.com, and there's 2 articles there. One is sort of the announcement article, and the other one, written by Matt Allard, has to do with his thoughts on the camera. Not necessarily all my thoughts, but an interesting article and very good. And it never ends here at the chat, or in the chat. And I appreciate everybody's time. Neil, I'm sorry you came so late. Hopefully you'll be able to make it to Cameron Flask. Leaded or unleaded drinks are welcome during the Cameron Flask live stream. And I'm going to do some more of these on lighting. If you want to have me cover a particular topic, which is more conversational without consulting time, and you want to do it on a live stream, then go to thec47.com, go to the contact page, and submit an idea for a future show, and I will definitely consider it. And we'll do this again. It was good. We talked about lighting. Hopefully people who are watching this on the replay learned something. If you're not subscribed to this channel, please hit the subscribe thingamajigger notifications if you want to know when the shows are going to come up. But based on the way YouTube works, you might find out that we're live about a half an hour to an hour after we're live, and then you may have missed the show. And you know how it works. Everybody, thanks again for coming. I appreciate it when people do show up to the live streams. It makes them actually, something that we have to talk about. And Vlad, come back later. Watch the replay if you're interested in this subject. I think we talked about some stuff that might be worthwhile. And I'll see everybody next time on the next episode.